just double check the YouTube link. Everything shows up. Yep. Leave a comment. There's always about 10-second delay. Perfect. All right, we are live. So hello everyone. Thank you for joining this event today, which we will be talking about DAOs, an introduction for the game industry. Before I jump into letting our panelists and speakers talk, I will be going through a first presentation of what is the Blockchain Game Alliance. And then we'll have a very interesting conversation today on this topic, which I find is amazing. So we have some of the best speakers in the industry in the space to tell us more about it. So first and foremost, what is the Blockchain Game Alliance? It is an organization committed to promoting the use of blockchain technology within the game industry. We are here to encourage adoption by highlighting the potential for enabling to create, publish, play, and build strong communities around game, promoting it to players, to developers, and more participants in the ecosystem. We also provide an open forum for individuals and companies to share their knowledge, to collaborate, to create new business opportunity, to promote their product to new users, new consumers, and potentially earn more revenue and awareness about what they are doing. We are here also working on establishing best practices and potentially the future of blockchain in general within our industries. The core activities of the Blockchain Game Alliance include networking, research and reporting, representing all the different members. We have now over 150 companies member of the Blockchain Game Alliance, and advocating for the use of blockchain in the industry. We have an amazing plan this year. This event today is one of the several new meetups and events that we have organized and are live streamed on YouTube. We're going to keep pushing forward, promoting the activity of all our members, and we'll be happy to have you join as well. So who are your members? As you can see, there's already over 150 companies. It's pretty large scope that covers not just only game studios, but also protocols, SaaS solution, blockchain, developers, and now even investors, media, PR, etc. So we are really reaching as broad as possible for us to increase the awareness that this new technology, blockchain, decentralization, non-fungible tokens, DAOs, and other topics can bring as benefits to the industry. Some of the recent events we've had earlier this year include virtual meetups with presentation of the new member, working groups discussing together around topics like decentralization and showcasing our product, offering speaking opportunities to various events to our member, publishing resources to help democratize the knowledge to traditional gamers and traditional gaming studio about play to earn, about non-fungible tokens, about decentralization, free tickets to various online events, and many more things that we'll continue to do this year. Today, we're going to talk about DAOs, an introduction for the game industry. So thank you for joining the event. We will have 6 speakers today: Eric Arsenault from DAOStack, Cooper Turley from MetaClan, Daniel Klonovet from Colony, Gabriel Shapiro, Bulata from Aragon, and Jonas Lamis from StakerDAO. Please give them a warm welcome. They cannot hear your clap, so I will clap for them. This is the agenda. So very soon I'll give voice to Cooper. Before that, I would like to thank Alex himself, who is the organizer for this event, and will give us a few words about why he wanted to organize an event today on this particular topic. And right before, just a big thanks to the sponsors of the Blockchain Game Alliance, namely AMD, Ubisoft, Matic, MakerDAO, and Animoca brands, who are supporting even more our alliance in general. Thank you. You can follow the Blockchain Game Alliance on Twitter, on Medium, on Telegram, and we hope you like to learn more and potentially join us. So I will give now up. All right, Alex, here you go.
Hi, everyone. So I set this up because I'm quite interested in how DAOs and DAO platforms could actually change things for us in the game industry. And I think we're at a time now where we're ready to do some experiments. When I'm involved in one, which Cooper will talk about, called MetaClan, which is an esports DAO. But I think I've always been fascinated with whether guilds and factions that we get in games, whether they could be DAOs could use DAOs to manage their assets. DAOs could also be used to help people creating user-generated content to work together, or perhaps even developers to work together and be rewarded together. So there's many different aspects to DAOs, and they're quite a complicated area that are only now just being explored, in some cases quite successfully, actually. So what we've got today is we've got 4 different DAO platforms, generic platforms, each of which have different advantages and disadvantages and different focuses. They are all different. They're not necessarily competing with each other in that sense. It depends upon your needs. So we decided we'd get them to present to you so they can tell you what they're good at. And we also have a couple of extra things. So we have StakerDAO, which is not a game DAO at all, but it is an interesting application of a DAO within decentralized finance. And that might have implications for games, but it will also be interesting to see how they've approached things and the technology they've used. And finally, we'll have Gabriel, who is going to give some legal pointers as well, because legals and DAOs are quite complicated, as I've been discovering. And so it's just good to have a sort of a starting point from there. So I'm going to hand over now to Cooper, who's going to give you a quick introduction to what a DAO is generally, and talk about MetaClan and Moloch, which is the platform that we're using at MetaClan. Sebastian, if you want to put Cooper in charge, I'll hand you over. If he does that. Sebastian.
So I can certainly appreciate that being of interest.
Here you go.
Hey, what's going on, guys? My name's Cooper. Hey, thanks, Sebastian. First of all, thank you to BCG, Alex, and Seb for having me out here. Been doing a lot of work in the DAO space for the past couple months, coming up on a year here. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the DAO framework that we're using, which is Moloch DAO, and then going a little bit deeper into MetaClan, which is an esports DAO that I've been running up with Alex and a couple other people in Metacartel. So just getting my presentation loaded here. Yeah, so as I said, presenting on behalf of MetaClan. This is our website, metaclan.games, if you want to come check us out. So to kick off, before we get into MetaClan, I want to talk a little bit about what a DAO is. So a DAO stands for a distributed autonomous organization. And what this is a way for like-minded individuals to band together and solve a common goal. It uses smart contracts to pull funds together and uses on-chain governance to figure out how to distribute those funds in a trustless manner. There are a bunch of different DAO frameworks, most of which are actually here today, which is awesome. We have stuff like Colony, Aragon, DAOStack, and Moloch, which is what we're using. And the big thing to keep in mind here is that a DAO can obviously be customized to meet your needs. So whether you're doing something really simple, like trying to band funds for a community garden, or going really deep to try and manage a multi-million-dollar organization, there's different ways that you can leverage blockchain to get these funds distributed and allocated effectively among large or small groups of individuals. So I get this question a lot about what DAOs are good for. In Ethereum today and in blockchain, we're seeing a trend of everyone trying to make a DAO. But beyond that, I think it's important to just take a look and say, what can we actually use these for? As I mentioned before, if people have a common goal and they want to put some skin in the game, it's a good way to incentivize value-added actions in a trustless manner. This means that anyone can put in a proposal to get funds of their choosing, and the entire community can actually vote and govern those funds in the way that they see fit. This enables faster capital allocation, as most times grants can be distributed in as little as 2 weeks, whereas this is something that will generally take upwards of 3 months to even a year in certain cases with other larger centralized organizations. To me, I found it most effective for organic community development, and it seems like DAOs are a good way to sort of incentivize people beyond the typical number go up aspect of blockchain, and instead get people talking about a collective mission of how funds can be allocated to solve a goal, rather than trying to just simply make a profit. So MetaClan is a crypto-native esports DAO. We're focused on gaming and play-to-earn mechanics. And it's a cross-game community for developers and players to come and share insights and key learnings about the different games that we play. It's home for game-specific quests, which DAO members get key benefits for. And we've been working with certain games to be able to offer our members benefits in those games that they wouldn't be able to find elsewhere. It's built on the Moloch V2 framework. So with that in mind, I'd love to dive into Moloch and what some of the key aspects of that are. Moloch can be thought of as a minimum viable DAO framework. It was intentionally made to be really simple. It was intentionally made to try and be not complex and to give people the freedom to allocate funding in an easy manner without any technical knowledge. It was made famous for the name Rage Quit, and this basically allows people to come in and out of the DAO at their choosing, basically putting capital in when they see fit and taking it out if there's something that passes that they do not agree with. For MetaClan, we're currently leveraging the V2 framework, which added a number of new features such as funding proposals and guild kick. I won't go too deep into this for the sake of time, but basically what you need to know is that with Moloch V1, it was difficult to allocate funding because you had to reward people in shares. And with funding proposals at Moloch V2, someone can put in a proposal and get DAI sent directly to their address. Guild kick's obviously important if there's someone that's being malicious in your DAO and the collective members want to boot them out of that. So that's another reason why we thought that this was helpful for MetaClan. It's interfaced through Dowhouse, which is a back-end tool, and Pokemon, which is a front-end tool, which people actually interact with the DAO. It's currently got over 100 DAOs and counting, and it's been a really great home for me to work on a number of DAOs, such as Metacartel and Raid Guild. So MetaClan as a DAO is actually a branch out of Metacartel. Metacartel is a way to fund consumer-facing Ethereum applications, and it was actually the reason that we started MetaClan. We actually applied for a grant of $3,000, and they were able to give us some funding to kick off our first quest, which has seeded the development of what MetaClan is today. Our first quest was a partnership with Axie Infinity. For those who don't know about Axie Infinity, it's kind of like a Pokemon Tamagotchi type infusion, where players battle NFT monsters against one another and compete for prizes in the form of small love potions, DAI, and a bunch of other ERC-20 tokens. For our first quest, we did a breeding tournament. This was intentional as we wanted to cater to new users and non-technical people, basically anyone who hasn't played the game before. We didn't want to set them up against people who had been competing for a lot of seasons. So we created a quest that was pretty inviting to people who have never heard of the game before. We offered DAO members free small love potions for breeding. We gave them access to virgin Axies that you couldn't simply get on the market, and basically gave them the exclusivity to buy a great starter team that they wouldn't be able to get elsewhere. We gave away DAO shares as prizes and even exclusive Axie tokens that weren't available anywhere else. In total, we had 30 participants, 100 Axies bred, and over 30,000 SLP distributed. We were able to get a lot of key learnings from Axie themselves, and we're definitely looking forward to do some future partnerships with them. Our next quest is actually going to be with the sandbox game. So I'll dive into this a little bit at the end of the presentation, but I thought that instead of doing that, I actually wanted to show you guys what MetaClan looked like under the hood. So as I mentioned, MetaClan is a Moloch DAO, which means that you can find it by going to this site, which is dowhouse.club. Right here, we have MetaClan as a DAO. And when we go and navigate to MetaClan, we're brought up to this front-end interface, which looks like this. So one thing that was really cool about our relationship with Moloch and the sort of Pokemon team is that they're able to give us this custom branded UI. I know that these sort of small things don't mean a lot, when we think about it from a legacy perspective, but given sort of the UX hurdles we see in blockchain today, I think that this is something worth noting that there's a lot of customizations that can be made to your front end, which make it a little bit more appetizing for people who have never heard about DAOs before. Diving into it, we have a bunch of proposals here. And this is where members can go to actually pledge for tribute and get funding, become a member, et cetera, et cetera. Here you can see some different proposal types: a member proposal if you want to join the DAO, funding if you're looking for funding from the DAO, whitelisting a token to add different currencies to the DAO bank, guild kick to kick someone out of the DAO, and trading for inter-DAO bank management. So what happens when you make a proposal in MetaClan is that your proposal goes into the unsponsored proposal queue. The cool thing about Moloch V2 is that anyone can make a proposal, which is drastically different from V1, where you actually had to have shares in order to make this. By going into the unsponsored proposal, anyone can go ahead and sponsor this and get it going into the queue, which then goes back to a vote. And after the vote, that's when people can actually go ahead and signal whether or not, yes or no, if they want this proposal to pass. After that, the proposal will enter a grace period, which is basically a 48-hour time window where if you see something that passed and you don't like it, you have the opportunity to rage quit and take your shares out. Once that proposal is completed, you'll be allocated shares into your account or funding, and this is where you can see your balance. Right now, MetaClan has about 50 paid members in the first month, which has been a really awesome response for us. The theory here is that we believe over the course of the next few months, the more quests that we do and the more games we encounter, the more members we can get to come and join us. Right now, we're really focused on education. So working with these gaming companies to basically spin up quests which invite new members to their community and also help existing members interact and interface with new people that are coming into the game. One of the cool things that we did with MetaClan is we built a Twitter bot to engage consumer interactions. So right now, when a proposal goes live, we actually tweet out something on our Twitter saying, hey, a new proposal is live. This is the name, the amount of shares. Please go and vote. One of the big things with DAOs today is voting is something that is hard to encourage. A lot of the times, not many people vote in a DAO, and it's something important for us to be building tools to be able to interact with that. The main place that we communicate in MetaClan is actually in Discord. This is where we have a number of different channels to be able to talk to members about what's going on in MetaClan, some of the different games, and kind of in the spirit of gaming, we really wanted to tie these two notions of blockchain and gaming together. And so for us, that means a series of roles, which basically give people different permissions in the DAO. If you join and you pledge, you become a guardian, you're able to level that up, you get access to different channels. And then here we have different quest channels, such as the one for Axie Infinity and our breeding tournament that we conducted. A cool thing that we're looking forward to right now is a partnership with POAP, which allowed us to distribute NFTs to everyone who completed the quest. And with these, they're actually going to be able to join specific channels in the future using something called POAP chat. So what this was is if you completed it, you got a code that said, claim this POAP. We know that you recognized and participated in this quest. It sends an NFT to their wallet with no gas cost. And then that quest and that completion of that is actually what unlocks this membership to take them from becoming a guardian to actually getting this role that has one quest complete. After that, we're going to be able to make channels where only those who have that NFT are able to join. And I think that that's a good way of signaling how some of this DAO stuff will evolve to become more friendly. And in my opinion, at least, the gaming space is really great because people are very open to trying these kind of things and making sure that it went well. The best place to kind of stay up with what we're doing is on Medium. So just last week, we posted a pretty extensive recap of our quest, what we did, and a bunch of details. So if you have any interest in learning more about our quest and what we're doing, definitely recommend heading over to Medium to check that out. We're most active on Twitter. And then you can also find us on our website, metaclan.games. This is where we have some information about us, our partners, and some of the games that we're working with. And we talk a little bit more about the DAO and our members. So as I mentioned, we've had a lot of great interest from games so far. The power to actually work directly with gaming studios and get them new members while also figuring out how to benefit our DAO members has been really well received. And these are just a few of the games that we're working with to date. Axie was our first quest, BGA, who's presenting today, Sandbox, which is our next quest, Flux, Metaboss, which is Alex's new game, Battle Racers, which is Gabby's game, who was the first judge for our first tournament. So it's been pretty awesome. We've only been live for about a month now, but since that month, we've had a ton of great interest. People seem really keen on it. And to me, it's been a really great experiment just in community and trying to figure out how we can better enhance and break DAOs, specifically like this Moloch front end, to try and make this as intuitive as possible for new members and people who have never heard of DAO before. So I'll leave it there and see if there's any follow-up questions. I want to give it a minute or two before my time goes over to see if there's anything that Alex has questions about before I go ahead and hand it off to our next speaker.
No, I think it's all good for me. We're going to do some Q&A after everyone's spoken. So that's the best time to do that. I should say that I'm involved with MetaClan as well, as I mentioned, and it's actually been a really refreshing experience. And we had 50 or more members join in the first few days, and they have to pay to join. It's not free. So it's been really interesting seeing how people react to it. There's clearly a demand for something where players get involved or have a deeper level of involvement, and a DAO is a good way to start experimenting with that. I think if we now move on to our next speaker, so I'm just going to let Seb take control again, assuming Seb is there.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
I'm here, yeah. We have Burrata now from Aragon, who is going to take the stage. I'll put him directly up front.
All right, cool. So yeah, MetaClan is awesome. Super cool DAO. If you're looking for a DAO to join to start playing cool games for fun and profit, hit up MetaClan. It is great. Okay, so here I'm going to talk about Aragon and metagame. So let me get this to share. Okay. Oh, hello there. All right. Can you guys see my screen? Yeah? Hopefully it's working. Okay, great. So metagame is super cool. Metagame aims to gamify life. So essentially all the things that you love about games, we're going to do that for life. And we're in the seed phase because we're pretty much planting seeds and ideas and things that can grow into a giant metaverse. And I'll explain to you guys kind of what that looks like and how you can get involved. Okay, so massive online coordination game. The big promise about DAOs is that they allow people to connect, coordinate, and collaborate across barriers. Anyone, anywhere, you have a computer, you have internet connection, you show up, you add value, and you should be able to create value and receive some of that value back. And so the idea here is that we're creating a giant RPG for that, where you can create a player profile, you can join a guild, you can acquire skills, you can go on quests, you can level up, get achievements, you can get different roles to give you access to different things. And all of that is managed via a hybrid system of some off-chain value measurements via source cred and on-chain DAO elements via Aragon and tokens and whatnot. So yeah, it's pretty cool. It's kind of like combines the best of both worlds into this giant metaverse type situation. So yeah, all the things that we care about in life, we want to bring into this. So we want it to really be something that empowers people and allows them to grow. And if we support the people who are part of our community and are part of our DAO and our game, then they will want to be part of it, right? So traditionally startups, they try to build something people want. With DAOs, what we're trying to do is build something people want to be part of, something that people really enjoy contributing to and engaging with. So yeah, we try to make sure that people have ownership of their identities and their assets and their skills and their data and all that stuff as per, Web3. And there's also ways to, accomplish things, level up, get scarce items, engage with other people with all of the game dynamics we love. So kind of bridging those two together to create metagame. So the first thing is breaking down the silos, right? It's not just about Web 2, Web 3. It's not just about do you have a token? Do you not have a token? It's a much more dynamic, fluid system where there's going to be lots of different tokens and lots of different ways to kind of level up through the system, right? So that way people from all sorts of different guilds and DAOs can contribute, they can participate. DAOs of DAOs can acquire tokens in the larger metaverse and participate. So it's not like just our one DAO or just a specific DAO platform or just something that's on a centralized server. It aims to be as composable and modular as possible so everyone can contribute. And by doing so, we hope that the game can evolve to reflect the vision values of everyone who collaborates in the metagame. So yeah, and the idea is we're starting with our kind of small crypto native community of all the people who are into DAOs and games and stuff, but we want to evolve it beyond that so that really it can just become something that anyone anywhere can participate in, even if they don't understand any of the fundamentals behind blockchain technology. And we're going to do that via the kind of memes of the whole thing to kind of abstract out the confusing terminology, and also custom front ends and interactions. So people hopefully never really have to deal with all of the pains and frustrations we know and love with Web3. So yeah. So with that, then it's like, okay, great. So that's all nice, but how do we do that? How do we bootstrap this? And in the past, DAOs have been very much altruistic in a sense, in that you have to show up, you have to donate capital, then you have to give that capital out to do stuff, or you have to donate your time, right? And that's all great, and it's super important that we have that, but it's not really sustainable. It doesn't grow. We need something that can not only create value, but capture some of that value in a dynamic community currency, essentially, right? So the idea is that we're building out the metagame such that when everyone joins and everyone participates, they create value, right? And some of that value goes back into the metaverse to then support all of the projects happening in the metagame. And so that way a value can come full circle. So if you want to engage in the metagame, if you want to access things or whatever, you can get some tokens, you can engage with the community. Or if you're creating value, you can get some of those tokens for creating value, right? So there's like engagement from creating things, engagement from buying things, and it all needs to come full circle so it can actually grow into a sustainable economy that can actually scale. So how do we do that, right? The billion-dollar question. So the idea here is that first we have to measure value creation. Like, what is value? Then we have to reward value creation, and we have to reward it in a tangible way, not just, a feel-good pat on the back or just, we have fun, but it has to be like real. So the way we're going to measure value is via XP, experience points, and that creates a player progression system. So when you do things, you level up. If you contribute to development of the meta game, you get points. If you contribute to conversations, you get points. If you contribute to operations, or you engage in calls, or you even play games within the metaverse, you get points. And all of these things happen across GitHub, Discord, forums, calls, chats, whatever. All of this happens wherever it happens. And the idea is we have a system, in this case, SourceCred, to track all of that activity and see how are people actually showing up and contributing. And the nice thing is SourceCred uses a PageRank algorithm. So the more you contribute, the higher your contribution weight is. Then when you engage with other people, it has a higher weight. So it kind of creates this kind of Sybil-resistant web of trust to a degree. I mean, obviously, PageRank is somewhat gameable, but creates somewhat of a web of trust in this. As more people engage and create value, then they have more of a say in what else is valuable. And that's how value is measured. And then, based on that, we have our in-game currency, seeds. And the idea is, for all of the value you create that gets measured, you get rewarded seeds based on that. So seeds are distributed to people on a weekly basis based on their contributor scores. And then those seeds are minted on the bonding curve. So if you want, you can cash your seeds out if you actually contribute to metagame and you want to pay your rent or whatnot. Or you can recycle those seeds back into the metaverse. Or do whatever you want with them. They're yours, right? It's a Web3 token. You own it. So that's kind of nice. It gives people rewards for actually participating, and it gives them the option to further engage in the community or live their lives as they want to. And if this works, as value is created, more seeds will be minted, and as there's more demand for seeds, then that whole thing can be sustainable. As long as there's a balance between seeds being minted and seeds being bought or used and burned, then the whole thing balances out. So, cool things you can do with seeds, right? Why would you ever want these seeds? Well, you can use them to stake on the direction of the project. You can cash them out. You can use them for membership dues to participate in the metagame. You can use them for boosting to get features or tipping others or giving them extra features. You can create guilds. You can pay for services from other players in the metagame. You can create quests for other people to play, which is kind of like bounties, but way better. Digiphysical wearables. You can create an identity profile. All sorts of things. There is a wide variety of options. These are a few we're going to make real, but because it's Web3, anyone can come into the metaverse, create something awesome. If people want to engage with it, they totally can. So yeah, one of those things that we are excited about that is a bit out there, but we'll see, is that you can collateralize seeds with ETH, and then you can use seeds to collateralize player profiles within the metagame. And then so every player can have a profile that's collateralized by seeds, but then they use their tokens to exchange value to create guilds. And then those guilds will have a token that can then do other things in the metaverse. So it's cool. It's like DAOs all the way down, all up and down. You can have layers of collateralization that are like on these continuous bonding curves that just kind of nest within each other to create this community economy. So that'll be fun. We'll see how it works out. So yeah, right now we have a DAO, and we are working on building custom front ends for that to make the UI UX smooth and awesome. And then we're going to launch that on mainnet in the near future. We already have a DAO on mainnet. We're going to launch a better one with a better UI UX. And then we're going to create player profiles. SourceCred is going to upgrade to make the whole process of measuring and viewing this graph of contributions a lot easier. We're going to update our kind of in-game world called Metaspace. And then we'll have this giant web of trust of nested collateralized tokens and guilds and everything. And it'll be very, very fun. So if these images inspire you, you should totally come hang out with us, because we're kind of building this whole deal. You can't see it on the screen, but each one of these little dots in the circle is like a thing we're doing and how it all kind of connects. And anyways, it's very cool, very fun. And so, yeah, we're trying to balance shooting for the stars while also being aware of the practicality of what we can do currently with the technology. And we're just pushing the limits of everything that's possible. And yeah, it's really cool. So if you want to join us, metagame.wtf, it's pretty great. You can jump in, and as soon as you log into Discord or create a profile in the forum and start commenting or liking on stuff, you will start earning experience points, and you will be part of the metagame. So yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this presentation. We'll move to our next speaker now. Eric, are you ready?
Yep.
Would you like to share some slides as well?
Yep. Hey, guys. Thanks for the presentation and thanks for the invitation and for organizing this. My name is Eric. I work at DAOStack, focused on DAO use cases, Dow Design, and working with clients to set up their DAOs and launch their communities. Today, I'm going to give you, let me just share my screen here, a short presentation about how DAOs can be relevant to the gaming space, along with a short overview of DAOs, just to recap. So traditionally in the blockchain space, you're taught that you have your own wallet, the assets that you own in that wallet are yours, and you can do what you want with them. So, you can send assets, you can swap tokens on exchanges, you can buy lottery tickets. With the DAO, it's a little bit different. With a DAO, it's a wallet shared by a group of people, and every single decision that you make is done by vote. And theoretically, anything you do with a personal wallet, buying lottery tickets or swapping tokens, you can do the same thing with a DAO through a vote. So you can integrate all those things. Generally, at least on DAOStack, you launch with a very basic DAO. You have a native token built into the DAO for the ecosystem, and voting power, which is non-transferable. And then you can upgrade these DAOs with various plugins and turn those into various custom DAOs. In terms of who governs those DAOs, it's extremely flexible. You can imagine giving voting power to holders of some token, or you can make it very democratic, one person, one vote, everybody has equal say. In the gaming space, maybe you could imagine getting voting power and reputation in proportion to how much you play a game or contribute to a game. Our interface looks something like this. These are funding and voting power proposals. So each of these cards is a proposal. It's very easy to create a proposal. Each of these proposals has a countdown. So there's a certain cycle to these DAOs. You submit a proposal, ask for, in this case, 37 ETH for funding, and there's a countdown. And if it doesn't pass during that time, you don't get it. And this one here has a 7% pass. And at the end of that time, if it passes, people vote on it, you get your funds out. As Cooper was mentioning, these DAOs generally have Discord channels or Telegram channels. There's weekly calls where people get together on Zoom, and then there's forums that help a DAO coordinate. So now I'm just going to go into a few use cases.
One interruption. Can you click on the present button? That should put you full screen, so everyone can see the slides larger.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Thank you.
So I'm just going to go through 4 examples of how DAOs can be used in the gaming space. So the first example is using a DAO to actually govern a game. So you can imagine, for example, in this game here, you have a DAO, and the decisions on the characters, the decisions on the assets, even the decisions on the rules of the game are decided and voted on by a community, by a DAO. Now, typically, you might have a centralized organization creating this game and getting some feedback from the community, but it's a very different feeling to having the game actually governed by the community. It's a much more liberating and empowering to the user to know that they have a direct say, and can change the direction of the game. And so we think that this is an interesting direction. As far as I know, I don't know of any games that have done this, but it's definitely something interesting. Doing something like this also allows a game to raise funds. DAOs are great vehicles for fundraising, and potentially a good way to bootstrap a developer community. And one note as well, in doing so, you don't necessarily have to give up financial ownership of the game by decentralizing the governance. Those things can be treated separately. So if you have a small team and you want to ensure that you profit from all of your work, you can allow the community to govern things without necessarily giving up the financial stake. Although if you do that too much, then the community might say, okay, well, we're going to fork your project. So it's a sensitive thing there. Second use case is using a DAO to govern rules within a game. So this is an example of a game called Dow, created by someone within the community. In this game, you have a bunch of people who pool together funds in these matches, and in each match there's a certain objective, and everybody within that match fights, or doesn't fight, competes against each other to complete that objective, and the winner wins the pot. So it's on the blockchain, and the way that they're using the DAO is to change the rules while the game is in play. So within that round with a bunch of people playing that game, there's a DAO and you can change the rules. And so you can imagine this concept being used in much more complicated versions. I don't know, like Counter-Strike, you have a bunch of people fighting, and then you decide to change the rules or change things. It's an interesting concept, but quite experimental. Another example is asset pooling DAOs. So obviously, as the gaming space, blockchain gaming space gets more popular, there's more and more of these NFT assets within the games. Apparently, I'm not a World of Warcraft player, but apparently people have been pooling assets together for quite some time during that World of Warcraft. So the idea is to do that within the DAO. So you have a DAO, people can pool their NFTs together and share assets, and maybe share 100 small knives for a rocket launcher or something like that, and then collectively manage those assets. And obviously, as these assets become more valuable and important, it's much more important to have that on the blockchain to make it transparent and for users to know that those assets are actually theirs. So there's quite some importance there. Finally, the concept of rewards DAOs, which is slightly different. In this model, you have a DAO that's externally funded. So let's say Angry Birds wanted to launch a DAO for their community. They could launch a DAO, they could send it funds, and then they could reward community members for their contributions. So in a similar way to metagame, how everybody's rewarding each other peer-to-peer, you would have something similar where community members could upvote content or retweet content or contribute to the Angry Birds community or project and get rewarded for that in some sort of micro rewards. And obviously you could do this in a more centralized way, but the benefit of having a DAO is that rewards are at the end of the day they're governed by the rest of the community. So you can have much more complex inputs than something that you would typically program with a more centralized rewards program. So it's more engaging for the community and also more flexible in nature. So yeah, that's all. If you want to talk about DAOs, you can get in touch with me. That's the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. So we'll be moving to our next speaker now, Daniel. Daniel, here. Sorry, here moving. Do you want to share your screen as well, Daniel? Here we go. Perfect. The stage is yours. Thank you.
We can't hear you.
Cool. All right. Just to kind of follow up what Eric was saying about DAOs governing games, this is a thought that I really wanted to share. I think that a great use case, like a great first use case for a DAO governing a game, would be a DAO governing a collectible card game, just because like the main task of managing a CCG is keeping the game balanced. And so my sense is that a great specific problem that a DAO could solve would be balancing a card game. And further, you could use someone's card holdings as a determination for their voting power. And so every card, you could have legendary cards would have more weight and common cards would have less weight. And so basically, instead of tokens, you have someone's deck is their voting power. And the things you have to do is balance the card game. I feel like that is like a self-contained use case is really compelling and I think would make a great first step. Anyways, I wanted to put that out there because I just am excited about it. Anyway, welcome to my talk. It's called The Return of Cybernetics, the Computer in a World of Change. My name is Daniel. I work at Colony as a research engineer. And let's get into it. So kind of the first part of this talk is a kind of a general little overview about cybernetics as a philosophy and kind of as like a school of thought, which I just think is of general interest. And then we'll get into Colony and how it kind of brings some cybernetic ideas into practice. And then we'll get into Colony and gaming at the very end. So first we'll talk about Stafford Beer, who is a British cyberneticist in the 70s. Very wacky guy. He wrote a monograph called Designing Freedom about computers and how they can be used to make governments more effective. And kind of his whole thing was that, around this time, 70s, people were just starting to use computers and they weren't really sure if they would be liberatory or controlling. But Stafford really felt like computers can free us. Something that he was involved with was Project Cybersyn, which was sort of like a kind of during Allende in Chile. They were really experimenting a lot with how to govern this country, and they brought Stafford on to develop kind of this whole like cybernetic system for governing the entire country. And there would be this control room with different screens showing the economy in real time, and there was a whole measurement and accounting and reporting system that he had developed that unfortunately never came to fruition. Because that regime didn't really make it to the end, and that's not really what we're going to talk about now, but this was an idea that was had around this time. And something specifically that I think is worth pulling out, and this is a long quote, but I think this kind of gets at the gist of what he had to say that is also what I want to say. He kind of made the point that a lot of the way that people manage organizations in the past, freezing continuous variables into arbitrary time epochs, like this is how much money we have in the bank today, we're going to vote on this proposal now. These sort of the static snapshot approach kind of obscures the truth, which is the truth is continuous change. And Stafford felt that we needed our representations of our organizations and our communities to really more accurately map and reflect the continuous dynamic nature of the world, and that approaches that were too static would inevitably fall out of step with the thing that they purported to represent. And so the entire interaction would feel very clunky and not ideal. And he kind of felt like, governments have to look at the interaction of dynamic systems. And when our models are static, they will not map on to what they need to be, and everything will kind of be bad. And so kind of the cybernetic idea was the world is dynamic and you must model the dynamism. And that computers play an active role in facilitating our decision-making by processing information for us, presenting us with the information that we need. And that the 70s were a time of technological idealism, which maybe the 2020s will be again. Anyway, moving on to Colony. So there's a couple topics in Colony that we're going to talk about. One is how we think about work. The other is how we think about reputation. Third is how we think about budgeting. And fourth is how we think about disputes. I don't know why that 4 is bolded. I'll fix that later. So kind of work is really the center of what's happening. And as Alex mentioned at the beginning, these different DAO frameworks have sort of different theses. And Colony's thesis is very much around daily operations, daily work, being very much something that is used in practice continually by people doing things on an ongoing basis. And so work is sort of the centerpiece of that. Things need to get done. People need to do them. Sort of the definition of what the work is done by people but there's aspects for machine evaluation, which is sort of like kind of philosophically a very interesting question of whether you want to be things being objectively measured or subjectively measured, and each one of those has its own kind of pitfalls. And although we use the term work, we can generalize this much more into doing anything that needs to be done. And in the context of gaming, you can be doing things in a game world, et cetera, et cetera. And kind of where things start to get interesting and very cybernetic is when we bring in reputation. In Colony setting, reputation is driven by peer review, where you do things, then people will basically assess if you did a good job or a bad job. And our kind of philosophy is that this will create a legitimacy. Like Goodhart's law is sort of the perennial problem of, when you have any objective measure that you care about, people will start to game it inevitably. And that sort of creates risks and problems of undermining the legitimacy of the outcome. And so one approach is to make things based on peer review, where legitimacy is a little bit more baked in, but obviously nothing is perfect. And with Colony, you have a very dynamic reputation system because it decays over time. And so you've got kind of like Stafford Beer was talking about change over time. We also have reputation decays over time. So it's earned in this kind of stepwise way based on peer review, but it's lost continuously. And because the amount of reputation someone can have is very, very not really set in stone. You can have a lot or a little. You have basically flexible hierarchy where some people can have more reputation than others, which means that they have more of a say, but anyone can have some reputation. And because it's always in flux, the leadership is always changing, which we think will lead to decision-making that is pretty good and maps very closely, going back to the cybernetics idea, who is actually doing work and leading in the organization. One theme that's coming up a lot more now is that control over resources is really where we want to be putting or locating the agency. And so, compared to voting on proposals, we sort of want to put the focus on managing resources dynamically in real time based on reputation. And this is, again, the cybernetics idea of instead of money being passed kind of piecewise in proposals, it's always moving around the organization based on reputation. And so you have a very dynamic system where funds are always moving, reputation is always moving, and the whole thing is very animated and alive, driven by the computer. And kind of the last thing is to make sure that things can be self-correcting in case anything goes wrong. We have a dispute system, which is very much like a kind of a challenge response. You put up a stake, someone can challenge you, there's a vote. If you lose, you get a penalty. And the idea there is that, if no one has objections to something, you can just go ahead and do it. But if there are objections, then we can sort of escalate the amount of resources we have to put into resolving the issue as the issue becomes more contentious. So the idea is to have kind of a gradual automatic gradation of how much energy we're putting into an issue as a function of how important it is, which our hope is sort of will avoid wasting mental energy on things that aren't really that essential. And so kind of summing up Colony as a cybernetic system, we have human inputs, but the computer drives the process by managing reputation, by managing budgets. And the result of all these systems coming together is a continuous output of value. The organization as a whole is doing something useful. And so to kind of bring it to applications to gaming, kind of two use cases that we've talked about is one, managing a guild. And so using Colony to manage a guild in a game world. And so reputation determines who's the leader of the guilds, and is also the result of maybe outcomes of raids. So going back to the West thing, people are doing a lot of raids. How can we make the outcome of the raid resulting in reputation that determines who's the leader of the guild? Going back to kind of the quest theme is coming up a lot in a lot of different projects. And so Colony has something called programs where we can give people specific steps to follow, which have more of a machine readable result to facilitate onboarding, right? Because if you have a lot of people that want to come into something, the overhead of sort of peer review for all of that is a lot. So if we can have a kind of more of a machine readable system for getting people onboarded, that is very valuable. Kind of like how would this work in practice? The idea of letting people borrow NFTs. So the Colony has a lot of NFTs that it owns and controls, and then people can borrow them for a period of time based on reputation. I put down a stake. If I have this much reputation, I can borrow this enchanted dagger, use it in the game world, bring it back within a week. My absolute favorite feature, really what I'm the most excited about, almost more than anything, is the ability to have in-game duels decide the outcomes of disputes in the colony, and that being a very legitimate way to make decisions about running a guild. And so you have there's a challenge, we go in game, we have a duel, everyone watches, the outcome is then cast on chain, it determines the outcome of reputation. I think that's so exciting. Another use case would be UGC creator teams, user-generated content. You give them funding, and then based on the output of people in the past, they can then decide what to prioritize and what to fund. So if I made amazing content, I will get more reputation based on peer review, and then I have more of a say in what we should be funding in the future. It's kind of another way that we can use something like Colony or a DAO to support this sort of a flexibly hierarchical team producing value. So that's basically my talk. If I have time, I can give a little live demo of a colony so we can see what we can do. But I think I might be almost out of time. So I guess I'll turn it back over. Oh God. I guess in seconds I'll kind of show that so this is, for example, a colony, and we can see how there's various things that can be done. But we also have a more of a machine organized program of this is kind of a similar thing to a quest. Do a variety of things, you earn a sort of variety of rewards, and then once you sort of finish these more structured progressions, you will be ready to participate more fully in the more flexible, more peer review driven kind of general colony work. Is kind of the flow that we would have in mind for a game or a guild setting. So that's it. Thank you so much. I'll hand it back over to the organizers.
Thank you, Daniel. So we are going to move with Jonas now from StakerDAO.
Hello there. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me drop in here on a Gaming Alliance presentation. I've shared my slides, so you should be able to see those as well here. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the finance space related to DAOs. My organization is called StakerDAO, and I'm going to share a little bit about what we're working on, how it may or may not relate to gaming down the road, and some of the lessons we've learned in building a for-profit DAO. And I know we're going to have a presentation on legal DAOs here next. I'm going to be talking about StakerDAO as something that generates profits for the DAO holders, and so that kind of throws us into this world of the securities and compliance, and making sure that we're doing things the way that different regulatory agencies around the world will pass muster. And so that's why I have a compliance notice here to share with you all. Any of the tokens that I discussed today are not advice for investment, and I'm not offering anything to be sold in this presentation. I'm just going to tell you what we're working on. So the main observation I want to have at the beginning here is really along the long arc of societal evolution, which is that for 20,000 years, humans lived in villages, right? We were in tribes, organized into tribes. What happened in one village didn't really have much of an impact on what happened in the next village. And then everything kind of changed with the Industrial Revolution, and the 20th century, in my opinion, is really actually an anomaly compared to the long arc of where humanity has been, and probably hopefully where it's going to go with smart minds like all of you guys. I like to say that 20th century really represents peak centralization, and I think that there's a good likelihood that with the advent of the internet, and with the advent of blockchain, and now with the advent of DAO technologies, there's a really good chance that we have an opportunity to go back to normal, or to go back to the village or to the tribe. But the tribe is not necessarily going to be something that's organized just a physical group of people. It's going to be organized based on like-minded, participation in productive activity. And the DAO plus blockchain really provides frameworks for that to be organized in our post-industrial future that we're all headed towards here. So in the DeFi space, there's a lot of effort in this world of the for-profit DAO. Everyone's probably heard of the original The DAO on Ethereum, which kind of kicked off a lot of this thinking. MakerDAO is the 800-pound gorilla in the space today on for-profit DAOs, although their token, Maker token, is sort of treated as a utility token, but it's also a place where profits accrue. The venture DAO folks are starting to make investments. The Lao DAO is a legal framework that any DAO can use to put together a group of investors that want to profit from their decisions. And now StakerDAO is what we're launching as well. And so with StakerDAO, what we've built is a platform for governing financial assets. And we're trying to do it in a decentralized way, which means we want the community to make the decisions about how those financial assets are managed. And we're trying to do it in a secure way. Our DAO itself actually runs on the Tezos blockchain, and I'll give a little color to why we selected that in a bit. And we want to do it in a compliant way. And so we've spent a lot of time in both building the DAO infrastructure in a way that it's distributed and decentralized, but we've also built things in a way with corporate organizations that make it legal, if you will. And so our DAO is actually supported by a Cayman corporation. All of the voting power rests in the token holders, but the ability to sign documents and launch tokens and things like that in a compliant way happen through an actual physical corporation. Now, as I mentioned, we have a governance token, which is the Staker token. We're launching a number of financial products. The first one is called Blend, which is actually going live this week. I'm not going to talk a lot about those financial products. I'm going to talk more about what we learned from governance. The first thing that we learned from governance is that participation is actually really important. And there's a lot of examples of not great DAOs out there right now with participation levels. Maker gets really low participation rates from its Maker token holders, 2-3% to approve a change in its ecosystem. We think that's a big risk. You want to have gamed your participation model in some way so that you have a strong representation of participation. Another DeFi product out there called Compound recently DAOified their venture shares. And they just a tweet from one of their investors who liked the proposals but didn't like the process. And so getting the process right and experimenting early on it is great, but building a model that will work for the long time is really important. The reason why we selected Tezos to run our DAO on is because Tezos itself is really one great big DAO that has been really successful in governance. And I say that because it has, several 100,000 layer one token holders, several 100,000 different individuals who hold this Tezos token, the XTZ token. But it has a representative model where those token holders delegate their voting rights to the node runners, the validators, or in the case of Tezos, they're called bakers. And those bakers are in charge of approving proposals that run through the Tezos governance process. And we've seen super high participation rates in this. There's about 450 to 500 voting bakers in the ecosystem at any given time. It changes based on the delegation rights that they have, but we're seeing 80+ participation percent in all of the governance actions that have happened on Tezos. And so we decided we're going to basically copy the Tezos governance process and apply it to our DAO, but change it in a way that it makes sense for the types of financial offerings that we're bringing to market. So if you go to governance.stakerdao.com, you'll see our governance process in action. We too, like Tezos, have a representative model. Our Staker token holders elect a council, and that council approves proposals that are put on chain by the Staker token holders on a monthly basis. And so far, we've had really good turnout for council voting as well. We've had 4 proposals flow through our system, and we've had 75% plus voting on all of those proposals since we launched. I think one of the key things here for us, because we're building a set of products that intend to be used broadly by financial services. This blend token that I mentioned that we're launching is a it's a synthetic product that represents proof of stake networks, and we expect it to be widely held across the financial services sector, and we think it'll get used in a lot of the DeFi products on Ethereum. It's an ERC20 token. It's important to have, we think it's important to have trust built in this governance process. And so we went out and we seeked out participants in our governance process, asked them to invest in the DAO itself so that they could potentially help govern it. And so we got some great folks in the venture community who have participated, and we have this initial council of people who are trusted names. And that's maybe slightly different than some of the ethos of anonymous trust the code. But in the world of for-profit DAOs, there's really this gray area where you have to have, somebody has to be responsible, or some group has to be responsible. And so we're trying to do that in a distributed fashion here with a list of trusted people who are actually making the decisions, and that will change over time. So where are we going with our DAO? As I mentioned, the first token we're launching is called the Blend token. It's actually launching this week. It's having an initial offering on CoinList, and then it'll be running on Ethereum as has some clever elements associated with its smart contract. We've been starting to talk about what comes after the Blend token at StakerDAO. One of the areas of interest that has been bubbling in our community is starting to put together some kind of collection of gaming elements that are unique. NFT tokens could be interesting. Collectible cards could be interesting. We could see an opportunity to acquire those kinds of things in our DAO, package them up, and then potentially create an asset around that package of offerings. Real estate is really interesting, both in the physical world and in the digital world. And I think that platforms like CryptoVoxels and Sandbox are ready-made for being able to leverage in a DAO like ours, but they're also ready-made for DAOs to be put in place to help govern the decision-making with inside those types of worlds. And so for StakerDAO, this is where we're going from a finance, investment, almost VC type of model, but it probably has some interesting lessons that can be applied to the gaming space, and particularly we're interested in helping share those lessons with folks who are building virtual worlds and DAOfied games. So I'll pause there and turn it back over to you guys.
Thank you, Jonas. So I will bring Gabriel on the stage now. Hello, Gabriel.
Hey there.
How are you tonight?
Good.
Excellent. Would you like to share some slides with us?
Yes, indeed, I would. One moment.
You will be the last speaker before we move to the Q&A. I think there's a sort of question boiling here, so it's going to be really interesting. Here you go.
Let me see.
Whoa, that's a large screen.
Yeah.
What
yes.
kind of size is that?
Oh yeah, I've got like an ultra wide monitor. Does it look okay, or should I switch to my other one? I have a smaller one as well. Okay, can you guys see this?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about the legal side of DAOs, and let me just set a timer for myself so that I don't go over. Just quick background on myself. I'm a U.S. corporate and securities law attorney, and I've been in the blockchain space for quite a while. I'll talk about one of the projects I recently worked on, which is right on target because it's a DAO that relates to gaming, and I live in California. So just kind of
you move to the next, are you able to increase the size? I think it renders really small overall.
Interesting. Let me see here.
Yep.
Did that help at all?
It's already better. Still
Okay.
small, but better. Thank you.
So, and I'll just kind of summarize everything anyway. So the, and I think I skipped a slide. All right. Well, that's fine. So, first of all, the first question relating to, DAOs and the law is what happens when you get a group of people together and you pool some assets? What laws apply and what legal relations apply and what should apply if you were designing it correctly, right? So I'll do a super quick thing on just the relation between, what I call legal agreements or wet contracts and smart contracts, because obviously most DAOs nowadays involve a smart contract on Ethereum, right? So that's important to understand. So a legal contract, most people think of it as a document, with a bunch of legalese words written in it, parties hereby covenant agree, and we represent and warrant that, and so on and so forth. But that's not the only circumstance in which you can have an agreement. In fact, many times an agreement is just created for you under the law. That's called a contract that's implied by law, or a constructive contract, or an equitable contract. So that's important to understand, even though you might hate the idea of being involved in the law and you don't like a long contract that people have to read. Even if you don't have one of those, you're still going to have a legal agreement. And just the fact that you use a smart contract, while the code of that smart contract might be evidence of what your legal agreement is, it's not the same thing as a legal agreement. So that's important to understand. So, wet contracts, have a whole system of law behind them. I won't get into all of that, but it can be very interesting. So, you have on the one side a smart contract, which is a bunch of code intended to do things. And you have on the other side, let's assume in the best case scenario, an actual terms of service or terms and conditions, or maybe even something like a partnership agreement or a set of corporate bylaws that you've written down. How do these two things relate to each other? There are different approaches, but there are two core approaches for purposes of this presentation. So one is what I call absolute code deference, or what sometimes people describe as code is law, right? So in this circumstance, you wouldn't have a written agreement, or at least not a very long one, and you would want to defer to the smart contract code as much as possible. So a great example of this is the Dow Terms of Service, because they didn't have no contract. They actually just had a very simple contract, and it just said, the terms of this DAO are determined by the code at a specific address on the Ethereum blockchain, and that's it. So that's what I call absolute code deference. Now, we all know what happened with the DAO, right? It got hacked, and people potentially could have lost a lot of money unless they violated that core principle of code being law. So that's how we had the hard fork. Most of the people, listening to this probably already know all the ins and outs of that history. But I take that incident as pretty much definitive proof that this approach of completely deferring to the code and just saying every time, every way the code executes that's legally binding on people, that's not going to work, because code does have bugs, it does have hacks, and there even can be things like reorgs that change the code without you wanting them to. So that's not a great approach. So my approach, the approach I implement for my clients, is something I call qualified code deference. So the idea behind this is, well, look, smart contracts would be totally useless if we, subjugate them completely to some legal agreement. But so we do want the legal agreement to defer to the outcome of the code in most cases, but we'll outline certain exceptions, like 51% attacks, an identifiable class of bugs and that sort of thing. And we'll say that the code is binding, except if one of those material adverse exception events happens. And if a material adverse exception event happens, then basically all the members of the DAO are obligated to kind of stop what they're doing, enter some sort of dispute process. It can initially just be a discussion among members where maybe they decide what to do. And if there's a strong disagreement there, it could maybe get escalated either to court or to a private arbitrator. That private arbitrator could maybe even be an Aragon court or Claros, or as someone suggested earlier, a video game duel to decide the outcome. But there has to be something, right? So that's the basic way of knitting together a smart contract and a legal agreement that, in my view, is likely to leave some value for the actual code, but also not be totally crazy like the original DAO was. So what happens when you get a bunch of people together, pool assets, and call it a DAO, right? Well, basically, you have, what the law would consider an association of persons, and there are different ways that can be classified under the law. So if you don't have any business entity, that is, you haven't gone to some government and filed a charter there that says, hey, I'm forming a corporation, hey, I'm forming an LLC, etc., then that's considered an unincorporated association. And in the United States and most other jurisdictions, if the purpose of the association is to manage some assets together to achieve a profit, that would be considered a general partnership. If it's not for profit, it might be considered a not-for-profit unincorporated association. At least in the US, all partnerships or an initial public offering, or it could be what we term a pass-through entity like an LLC or a limited liability partnership, and those are best for like services businesses like law firms that are passing revenues through, or potentially for like investment funds, potentially for investment clubs, right? Like MetaCartel Ventures, which I'm a member of and also represent as counsel, is an LLC. So what does this mean for liabilities? People always ask about that. Well, general partnership is the worst because all the partners are jointly and severally liable for the full amount of all liabilities of the partnership. And that's you can often you can waive that away if you're entering into a contract with a commercial counterparty. If the DAO is getting hired to do some software development, it could agree that the person that hires it won't sue the members individually or only sue them up to some cap. But if you do like a product, if you have like a product tort claim against you or a fraud claim against you, there's no helping that with a contract, right? That's non-waivable. But on the other hand, general partnerships do have a benefit, which is that they're presumed not to have securities involved in them. A nonprofit association, interestingly, in some jurisdictions like California, gets us pretty much the same limited liability protections as if the people had gone to the state and filed a corporation for a corporate charter. So that's kind of interesting, and not many people know about that. So if you have a nonprofit DAO, you may not need to form an entity in order to get limited liability. And then business entities, that's the nice thing about business entities. In most circumstances, the shareholders can't be liable for liabilities of the entity. So there are also different membership duties and powers associated with this. Wow, I'm really running short on time, so let me speed through this. So long story short, general partnerships can have fiduciary duties associated with them by default. You may not want that, right? Corporations have more narrow fiduciary duties by default, and then LLCs are completely customizable. That's another reason why we chose that for MetaCartel Ventures. And then ownership, in the US, unlike some jurisdictions with their partnership laws, we actually have like a quasi-entity treatment of partnerships. So the partnership actually owns the assets, not the individual members in the US. And then for all the other types, it's the entity that owns the assets as well. Tax is complex, but basically, if it's a corporation, the entity will pay tax and be a tax reporter. Otherwise, it's the individual members. 1 second. So what do you do? Well, you should always have a legal wrapper. You should always have something, even if you're not forming an entity, even if you want to be lightweight and you don't want like a 100-page thing, you got to at least have some terms of service that spell out a little bit what the relationship between these people is meant to be, what liabilities they're supposed to have, and so on. If you don't do that, as much as however good the code is, it doesn't matter. You're basically crazy. So you should always have something. And if there's a risk of some tort liability, liability or something like that, in my opinion, you should definitely have an entity. So gaming specific considerations, here's the fun part. So I represented MetaFactory. The way MetaFactory did it, they have auctions for digital wearables that also have a physical wearable to go along with them. And so they have an unincorporated association that's basically a partnership as a DAO, and people hold governance tokens, and the DAO, that unincorporated association as an entity, owns the IP for the designs. So they can vote on doing future issuances, of the in-game NFTs, and it's really cool that way. It's like shared ownership of a set of IP. What you want to do for that, there's also an IP element to that, where you really want to strongly say that the Nifty represents a license to the IP on the part of the user, and that way all the things that people say about Nifties, that they have this unique value, et cetera, associated with the design, can really, really be true, because on the legal layer, there's a tight correlation between the design and the Nifty. And then you would want to give a sub-license to the server for any game environment that's displaying that design within the game. So further ideas for this type of thing within games would be, guilds could be DAOs, right? And those DAOs could be organized as real life unincorporated associations or business entities with real ownership of the DAO trademark and the DAO assets, of the guild trademark and the guild assets, et cetera. They could be paid by the in-game for winning tournaments, and there'd be like an actual legally recognizable thing to receive those funds and be entitled to them and sue if it wasn't paid. You could tokenize membership interest in like a guild or like a class or a clan, and you could do in-game IP licensing. So like a clan could come up with its own in-game licenses, items, and it could like a warlock level item. If a non-warlock wanted to use that, that could be a license, and maybe the non-warlock has to like pay the warlock guild to use that. So you could do all sorts of things, and it's really helping blur the line between the virtual world and the real world through legal technology, in effect. So that's really it. That's kind of the quick and dirty on these things. And I'm always happy to answer questions and chat about people with these things and to help people set them up, right? Like I helped MetaFactory. Yeah, looking forward to the future.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. So we're going to move into Q&A time. We have prepared some questions on our side, and maybe we'll start with a general question that all participants can answer to. Then, yes, something, quick reminder. There was an announcement, I think, that wanted to be made. I will bring Burrata on stage first. Tack here. Hello, hello.
Hey, yeah. Did you want me to talk about Aragon, or was there an announcement? What is there a difference between those two?
You can say what you want to say.
Oh, I don't really have anything to say, but I can talk about Aragon if you guys want, because I kind of skipped over that in my little presentation. Do you guys want me to do that for a few minutes? Yeah? Okay, cool, great. Okay, let me share my screen again. Boom. Entire screen. Okay. I think it's sharing. Is it sharing? Yeah, great. Okay, cool. Yeah, so Aragon essentially is a modular DAO platform. It's pretty great. It empowers communities and people to build digital organizations kind of however they want. Global first, obviously it's on the blockchain. It's transparent. We audit most things. When you launch your DAO, it's yours. It's free and open source software. That's great. Lots of people have built a lot of DAOs. That's pretty cool. And when you build them, you can use all of these apps, right? So we have this kind of modular app marketplace with all these different mechanisms, and you can compose those mechanisms to create whatever type of DAO you want. It can be really simple. It can be really complex. It can have bonding curves. It can have many tokens. It can just be a handful of keys that control a protocol. It can interact with arbitrary contracts in the world, so the DAO can act like its own little entity that interacts with other Ethereum contracts, tons of stuff. It's pretty great. There's a lot of communities that are using it, and it's pretty cool. So see, like a lot of these projects here are using Aragon DAOs for various things. And the important thing here is you'll notice with all these projects, they're doing tons of different stuff, right? Like Collab 19's trying to save the world, Metagames trying to gamify all the things, Saint Fame sells like clothes and stuff, Downuts is like community points for like subreddits, Common Stack is like improving like mechanism design, LexDAO is like a guild for legal hackers. I mean, they're all totally different. And that's kind of the point, right? If the technology does its job correctly, it empowers people to do the things they want to do. And the focus is on the people and the awesome stuff they're doing. The technology just fades into the background. So if we are as successful as possible, no one will even know. They'll just know that there's awesome people doing awesome things and that you can communicate and collaborate and do stuff in the world across boundaries with anyone. And like there'll be tons of projects doing that. And like Aragon exists to empower that. But the focus is really on the people and the communities doing awesome stuff. And so if you have some dream of some awesome DAO or thing that you want to do, there's a high likelihood that you'll be able to create that with Aragon and integrate it into a very awesome, unique experience. So yeah, that's most of that.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, so we have a few questions lined up. I'll try. I will remove myself in a second so I can have all the speakers on stage at the same time, and I will just display the question at the bottom of the screen, so watch the screen. I think the first question is quite general, and it's for all speakers. It is, can you manage NFTs? If so, how do you handle the shared ownership, trading, selling of those assets?
Right now at MetaClan, how we're handling NFTs is just using a multi-sig wallet. So we have 4 summoners who have the keys for that. It's a 2 of 4 multi-sig. We're looking into different ways to divide ownership of that through fractional shares. So basically just trying to do pro rata claims on that NFT in the DAO bank. But right now it seems like there hasn't been any tooling to easily allow NFTs to be stored in the DAO. So it's something that we're continually exploring and trying to find solutions for.
Yeah, and with Aragon DAOs, it's pretty simple. You can just drop the NFT into the DAO's vault essentially, and that vault is called an agent. An agent is like a smart vault essentially. It's like a vault, but it can act as an EOA on the Ethereum network. It can interact with arbitrary external contracts. So the DAO owns it collectively, right? And you can use all the different governance mechanisms to decide how to make decisions with that. And then with the NFTs, you can interact with other contracts, you can trade them, you can do whatever. So yeah, that's kind of what that looks like.
On the DAOStack side of things, you can manage NFTs. The challenge that we've seen is around managing NFTs that need to be used by individuals in games. Then it gets a little bit more challenging because you don't want the DAO to hold the NFT, you want the people to hold the NFT. And some NFTs actually earn interest or return, so they need to be used. So it gets very complicated. But just for simple holding and sending in NFTs managing, at least DAOStack, we can do that.
Oh, another quick thing on the Aragon NFT side is just like if you also want the DAO can like create its own NFTs or whatnot via the agent, because it can act just like a external account, just like you create an NFT or whatnot. And the other cool thing is with a very complicated on the back end voting connector type situation, you can actually make it so that people can use their NFTs to participate in voting via the different governance mechanisms. So you can wire that up such that NFTs can actually be used to participate in the DAO governance via the voting apps. Requires a lot of custom wiring, but you can totally do it. So, yeah.
So I think we're supposed to read the questions here, right? Is there a minimum amount of feature set that I'll ask the question because we need some moderator here. Is there a minimum amount of feature set that a game should implement in order to enable a DAO to run on top of its gameplay?
That's a tough question.
One thought, kind of just going off what Eric was saying. I mean, like going back to NFTs, right? Kind of the issue is if you want a DAO to control an NFT, but you want people to be able to use it, do you need two notions of ownership, right? If you look at ENS names, there's the person that owns the ENS name and the person that it's like assigned to. So I wonder if like part of the NFT spec for DAO management would be, you know, who owns the NFT and who has the use of it. And it seems like dividing those two things apart would be an important step in making it possible to let people rent, borrow NFTs from their DAOs without running the risk of them running away. I feel like this is one thought that I had and I wanted to share.
Right. Maybe to give some context to the question, I don't think it's only related to NFT because NFTs are like game asset tokenized. So do you think like games can, like we are talking about like game logic, game rules, is there a minimum of input and output commands that game developers need to put maybe via an API or some sort that allows then other to run one or multiple DAOs on top of it? What is this framework, if you have a definition of such?
I'll just add, let me just throw a couple thoughts out of there, what we're seeing in the financial services space, and then you guys can talk about how that might apply to the gaming space. And what's happening in financial services is that there's a core team with a great idea, and they want to raise some venture capital in order to get that idea to market. And so they go off and they sell shares in their startup, and they collect investors. But at some point in time, they want to then turn those investors into, they want to turn that investor token into a utility, or they want to broaden the set of people who can make decisions about their products. And so we see a number of these formerly for-profit venture-backed companies who are now DAOifying their decision-making token. Compound has done this recently. UMA has done this recently, and I think we're going to see others doing it. And so I think there's this natural tension between getting funds on board with people who want to profit from that decision-making early, but then trying to open it up so that the community can then govern the thing going forward. I don't think there's a perfect solution yet, but I think in the DAO financial space, we're seeing that evolve. Companies that are starting centralized and then are becoming decentralized, and probably the gaming space can do the same thing.
Yeah, I'll just chime in and say that in terms of the features, in order to enable a DAO to run a game on top of it, I think it really depends on what features you need and what the DAO is doing. So, you know, in a DAO, you have stakeholders who can govern. So, you know, for the game, my first question would be who are the stakeholders? Who's actually doing the voting? How are they getting voting power? And then what are they controlling? What assets are the DAO controlling? So all these questions really, you know, I call this DAO design, really have really huge implications on what that looks like and what the minimum feature set. At a very basic level, you could say, well, if the DAO is just a community and some fees are going to the DAO and the community is governing those fees, it's very simple. I mean, we could set that up in a day. It's nothing complicated, but you know, it can get super complicated on the other side of things. So I would say, you know, I stress the importance of DAO design and making sure that these DAOs have a good model. I would say that would be the first step to figure out what your needs are, and then going from there.
I think another angle to look at this is thinking about how data is going to flow from the game world to the DAO world, right? And like, you know, getting data on chain is non-trivial, especially if it's coming from a source that is, coming from a source that isn't the chain itself, right? Like oracles, etc. It's like a pretty big, basically impossible problem. And, you know, one approach to take is attestations. If someone's saying this occurred, and if you think I'm lying, you challenge me. And the more clear and objective the game can provide an events log of saying, all right, these are all the things that occurred in the game, it'll make it easier for people to then put that data on chain and have that be trusted and legitimate. And so thinking about a clear events log from the game, making it easy to get data on chain, and then vice versa, although probably this is easier, having a game read from the chain to determine what the state is in the game world. But thinking about how those data flows are going to work and making it as difficult as possible for people to manipulate or confuse or mislead either the DAO or the game world is another thought.
Yeah, and also like to build on that, there's a really cool thing called Ceramic that is like launching, which is really awesome because it allows you to create like arbitrary data structures and documents that are like encrypted and all signed together, and they don't necessarily have to be on a blockchain, but they can be checkpointed on a blockchain. So if you incorporate something like that into your game, you can cryptographically verify all of the state changes and all of the things, but do so like on a side chain or just completely off chain, and then put that proof on chain and verify that everything was done correctly. So that's another thing that could maybe help.
Thank you. All right. Next question is from Edward Thompson. So question, probably for Gabe. What are the approximate costs for setting up a legal entity behind a DAO? Comparable to setting up a company? And do you have any recommendation or preferred jurisdiction for that?
Right. Oh, and I guess I missed the prior one about the IP, so I'll tie them together. So, and the other question was, how does a DAO hold IP, right? So
you can answer after if you like, or as you want.
I'll answer them both since they're right next to each other. So the way a DAO can hold IP, there are two main ways, right? The easiest way is to consider the DAO an association or actually form an entity like an LLC or a corporation, and then that association or that entity would own the IP, right? Just like any other piece of property, a legal entity can own that, and then what that means is that the power to sell that or do things with it, license it, and so on, that's going to need to be subject to a vote of the members or approval of some representatives that were appointed by the members and so on. The other main way to own IP is a little old-fashioned and probably cumbersome, but maybe it could be cool for some types of DAOs, and that's what's called a tenancy in common or a joint tenancy, and that is literal co-ownership by two or more individuals. Sometimes happens in families and stuff, like if they inherit property, often real estate. So that is theoretically another option, but probably not a very useful one in most cases. As far as setting up, a type of legal person that could do this ownership, the costs are not huge just to set it up. Right, to set it, like let's just assume you had a very standard certificate of incorporation and bylaws that you could easily get off LegalZoom or something. You're probably looking at like $300 or something to form a corporation. The trickier and potentially more expensive part is, of course, we haven't standardized relating these types of organizations to smart contracts in any way, and people are still exploring that. So as far as I know, I drafted the first qualified code Deference LLC agreement for a Delaware LLC for Metacartel Ventures, and I totally open source that. It's public. You could fork it and give it to your attorneys to do something with. So that could be more expensive, right? Because you don't know how to do it for yourself. Your DAO, you might not use a Moloch DAO v2 like Metacartel does, and so you might need different drafting. And so that could be the more expensive part of it, but it shouldn't be prohibitive. Maybe 10 to 15,000 would be at the higher end. Could be as low as like $5,000 in legal fees. So yeah, and I would generally, my default would be, if you're going to set up an entity, I'd say make it an LLC and make it Delaware, because Delaware has incredibly strong case law saying that you can basically customize the LLC nearly any way you want. There are only a few things that you can't change. And so, for a DAO, that can be very useful. And other jurisdictions, although they might theoretically have the same rules, it's not as strong in terms of precedent. If it's going to be an unincorporated association, I would again say somewhere in the United States, surprisingly enough, because the United States is unique in at least treating partnerships as being entities for most purposes. The only purpose that it doesn't treat them as an entity for is when there's a third party who has suffered damages somehow from the partnership and wants to sue the members for recovery. There you still get the old non-entity rule that each partner is jointly and severally liable. So that's the long and short of it.
Great. Thank you for those great tips. Next question will be, all right. Question for everyone. Can a game developer be a DAO itself?
As in one individual? I'm
I would
assuming
say
so.
I think they mean like an organization. Like, could a group of people come together and form a DAO and then develop games with that? I would assume, right?
Yes. Like a developer, you refer to a studio or a single person, but usually it's more like sort of like a group of people.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that would be ideal. I think, if you have a group of like-minded people who want to come together and build a virtual world, and they want to DAOify the whole thing, so that other people can join it over time and they can all potentially profit from it with on-chain governance, that would be fantastic. And that's what we're doing in the financial services space. That's what StakerDAO is. It's a group of investors who formed a DAO, and they're making investments and launching products out of it. Not game products, we're launching financial products, but it's the same kind of model that we're trying to bring out.
Yeah, I believe there are a few developer cooperatives in the different ecosystems, Raid Guild, Deorg. I'm not sure, Brad, if there's one in the Aragon ecosystem.
One
pretty
sure there is. Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's pretty common. And if you're talking about you yourself as a developer wanting to launch a DAO for yourself, I would say, maybe just go with a personal token, and, then you can, do things a lot more freely. You don't need governance. So yeah, you could, but it would be a lot of friction, I think.
Yeah, I mean, on the collaborative building of things, that's kind of what metagame is all about, and that, like, it's a DAO. Just by showing up and engaging, you start to earn points. And if you want to build something, you can just build it. And if people start using it, then more points will accrue to that thing. And then people who, helped build it will then get tokens from that. And so it's just a big, giant experiment in, collaboration to build stuff, this, virtual world that is totally gamified. So, yeah.
Yeah, and also kind of to plug again the digital collectible card game idea, I really think it's just a perfect first use case for a DAO-governed game, because the interactions are so limited and well-defined. It's like literally creating and deploying cards, editing cards for balance, and using cards as voting rights. It's like such a tight, self-consistent system. I really would encourage people to think about doing it, because I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. Moving to the next question from David Rankin. With a DAO, how do you prevent a 51% vote attack, allowing someone or a small group to vote in the rules that give them complete control over the remaining 49%? So are there mechanisms to protect against that?
Yeah, so I actually have a couple of thoughts. I'd like to take this first. I think that a part of the issue here is, when we frame decision making as pass-fail votes on arbitrary anything, you create the risk of 51% attacks, right? The 51% attack is not some property of the world like gravity. It's the result of a certain scheme of decision making that's oriented around binary proposal voting, And so if you have a system which is more maybe cybernetic, more about flows over time, more continuous, then this issue sort of doesn't occur in the same way, right? So it's not something that inherently has to be there. It is the result of certain ways of thinking about decision making. So if we're able to think differently about decision making, then these types of risks kind of go away. It's kind of.
Yeah, totally. Like, there's a lot of governance mechanisms that are super great that aren't just that very limited time box voting. Like, if you want to have like some sort of continuous mechanism, like conviction voting, that's awesome. If you want to set the quorum super high, that's also awesome. If you want to create some sort of like challenge response mechanism where, like, when a vote like happens, then there's a period of a delay where people can either rage quit or they can dispute the proposal or whatever, that also helps. There's a lot of mechanisms that can happen outside of just 51%, because that 50% thing is kind of arbitrary. You could pass a vote with 20%, you could pass it with 90%, whatever. There's a lot of flexibility there.
So I have some thoughts on this. So I think this is the critical question for DAOs, the most important question, and the one area in which, undoubtedly legacy entities are currently superior because the whole all the massive number of corporate law cases in Delaware that people want the benefit of when knowing about when they incorporate in Delaware and so on. The almost all of those are about minority rights. Right. There's like an entire like multi-volume law treatise called like Oppression of Minorities in Corporations. Right. And we don't have this today with DAOs. We might get it by accident, but we don't kind of consciously have it. And you know, a lot of the things like I love Moloch DAO, but one of the things that it did was it created this bias toward yes, because it doesn't have a quorum requirement, right? So that to make that work or like not lead to like attack scenarios, you need to make sure you have really good like DAO ops. You know, there's a company called Abridge that's working on this stuff that make sure all the members are always knowing when there's a proposal, so like they can jump in if they hate it or something, so that it just doesn't kind of end up getting approved by default. But it gets even deeper than that, because if the DAO allows like a majority member or a group of people who, for extrinsic reasons, are affiliated with each other, they could be friends with each other, they could have common investments in other things, and they could all just vote as a block, then you do have this issue of like the minorities, right? And we saw this with that, I'm forgetting the name of it, but there was one DAO that basically was being run, for the benefit of the majority, and they were funding their own projects and stuff. And that's why the law exists, right? And that's why, so like if you might get into that situation, you might want a corporation, because then a Delaware court could step in and say, hey, the majority is abusing the minority, and since it's a corporation, we have rules that can deal with that and protect the minority. But this is a very big issue for DAOs.
Yeah, at least in DAOStack, you have voting power, which is non-transferable reputation, and that acts as a safety mechanism to 50.1% attack. It's not bulletproof, but that reputation distribution is just something that is given through social consensus. So we have many DAOs that are saying, okay, nobody's going to be allowed more than 5%. And they have some very loose KYCs where, you just have to prove you're human to the group. And that ensures that everybody, even if you put in a lot of funds, if you're getting tokens or something like that, everybody has the same reputation distribution, or at least a cap, and it's fairly limited. That doesn't prevent people from colluding, off chain and trying to vote together. But if you have a low cap, then it requires quite a bit of effort to actually get that 51% attack.
All right. Thank you. Moving to the next question from the audience. Can a community DAO be set up to fund a social media / minting platform and be used to maintain its future development to keep it purely community driven?
So I think that is definitely possible. However, I would recommend that there is someone sort of leading that charge. I think we've seen a lot of examples where a lot of DAOs, when they try and go purely community oriented, sort of lose steam. There needs to be either some sort of paid role or some sort of organizer who's claiming responsibility for that. It's not to say that they can't be a community member, but there does need to be clear expectations of commitment and time allocation among a small group of individuals to kind of keep the ball rolling. And I think without that, it's kind of difficult to see something of substantial value be created.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I sort of feel like there was a kind of a sentiment for a while that if you just deployed a mechanism, it would like spring to life almost like a golem. You could just launch it and it would become alive. I think people are kind of remembering that, no matter what technical systems you have to support your functioning, like you do kind of need leadership. We haven't quite figured out how to get rid of that yet. And I just think accepting that no matter what we do, like we need leadership, at least at the beginning, to get things started. It's just true. Seems to be.
Yeah, it sounds like a great use case. I think just to echo things, I think, yeah, you need a strong core. And I also believe you also need people to guide you through the DAO world. I mean, it's not, it's just not intuitive yet. Like I think it's, if you don't have someone holding your hand, I think it'll be a more challenging.
And I think adding on to that leadership discussion too, the cool thing about DAOs is that that leadership role can have far less we'll call dictatorship or power, right? So like just democratizing that access and that ability to make decisions. There might be a leader, but the fact that the community can much more drastically influence that leadership is something that I really like about DAOs.
Yeah, I actually really agree. I really want to echo that. I feel like having hard power be more distributed, but soft power, I think we still need leaders, but I think that leadership should be moved from a hard power role into a soft power role. Seems like the right way to go about this.
Yeah, if I can just share what we did at StakerDAO on that front, which is that, we need an entity that can sign contracts. We need we need a throat to choke when things go wrong from a regulatory and compliance perspective. And unfortunately for me, that's me as the founder of StakerDAO. Like we got a lot more exotic on our incorporation, strategy. So we have a Cayman entity that we've created. That Cayman entity has two classes of shares. One class of those shares are the ones that I hold, and they're not worth anything except they are the signatory shares, right? So they're the ones who actually get the final sign off on contracts and whatnot. And the other class of shares is what we've distributed to our DAO token holders, and all the voting is in, all the governance rights are pushed off to that class of shares. But at the end of the day, the actual layer of signing happens through the class of shares that I control. And it's not ideal for me at all, but it is ideal to get something started that attempts to give all the power to the DAO holders while still being able to operate within a legal framework of issuing financial offerings around the world. So we'll see how it goes. But, there's no great solution on this yet as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, and I think just to add on that quickly, the role of summoner of DAOs is becoming more important, right? So like as we echoed earlier, anyone can spin up a DAO, but if you are going to be the one going out and spinning up a DAO and summoning it, there should be some degree of responsibility that you take for making sure it, gets on its way properly, has proper incorporation, is handled with compliance, et cetera, et cetera.
Excellent. Let's move to the next question. Probably as we are running already a little bit over time, it will be one or two last questions, and we will end the event, but we can continue the conversation on our Discord or Telegram channel if the speakers are still available for it. It's really, really, really interesting. All right, which question did I pull in yet? This one maybe, kind of like a open-ended question. So DAOs are still early stage. What do you see in the future for DAOs in terms of adoption, technology, features? Tell us.
Well, first thing, people won't talk about DAOs. Like back in the day, there was like cyber everything. Now we have DAO everything. We're going to stop doing that pretty soon. And it'll just be about people doing cool stuff. And yeah, of course, they use some sort of digital organization that has tokens and governance rights or whatever, but it'll just be part of creating a thing. And we'll stop using the word DAO so much because it's really vague and unspecific.
Yeah, and I think using DAOs will be a lot easier too, right? So right now, obviously, we are all pretty educated in blockchain and the inner workings of MetaMask, or say something Ethereum based. But stuff like Aragon Gardens, we'll see DAOs become much more usable for non-technical users who have no idea about what's going on under the scenes. They can enter into a DAO using a credit card, they can vote using Telegram, and hopefully over time that makes it a little bit easier to access them.
I think that, if you look, just kind of squint a little bit and you look at things like crypto voxels and sandbox and stuff like that, and you look at, the Oculus Quest headset that I have and Echo VR, and, you see where this is all going. Like in the future, everything is going to be tokenized. Like all financial assets, we think, are going to be tokenized. So much of our lives is going to be spent in digital space in the future that all those things that we wear on our characters and the games that we play and the things we do, it's all going to be tokenized. And we're going to want to replicate what happens in the real world: scarcity and uniqueness and creativity and ownership and and buying and selling things, and that's all going to happen through whatever the future of DAOs is, however they evolve. And like I said, the 20th century is an anomaly, and big, AAA gaming shops that are building Fortnite and stuff like that, those guys are dinosaurs, right? They're going to go away because soon enough the technology is going to be in place for people to recreate things like Fortnite and all the fun games that kids play with blockchain-based decision making. And when that happens, it's going to be an explosion in creativity and driven by DAOs and single corporations that get all the profits from these games by selling packs of this and that are dinosaurs.
Something else I think is worth talking about is that, kind of just our base of practice right now is pretty shallow. We have all these ideas of new ways of doing things, but most people coming in are not used to working in this way. And I think that it will take time for people to develop just the experience of practice, of participation, to become more comfortable working in these ways. And it's something that just over time and experimentation, people just learn how to do this. And without that basic experience and practice, it'll be harder. And so I think that just time will make that foundation more substantial.
Yeah. I would say, looking into the crystal ball is always hard, but I would say, obviously improved usability, more experiments. I see a future where every organization, every social group has a DAO. I would imagine that the DAO space will keep chugging along, growing, and something will explode. Maybe it's Facebook adding DAOs to their Facebook groups, or something that just makes this accessible to everybody. And before you know it, everybody's using DAOs in their networks, of friends or groups, and they don't even know it. I'd expect something like that will happen at some point, but that's hard to predict.
Yeah. Something else I think is worth bringing up, and I think it's really appropriate for this sort of game audience, is thinking about how the experience of participation can be improved. I feel like we're starting from this kind of boardroom frame of reference of this is obviously how you run organizations. It's in a boardroom, and that's obvious. That's not necessarily true. I think one of the things I'm really excited about, in particular metagame, is how they're really experimenting with how we can make the experience of participation as fun and engaging as possible. And I think thinking about, if you want popular participation, you have to make it fun to participate, and thinking about how we can make the experience of participating as fun as possible, I think will go a long way to making these things become adopted.
Yeah, and beyond sort of like the fun nature of that, right? Specifically within gaming, the notion of being able to earn rights in a game simply by playing it and becoming good at that is something that we haven't really seen before, and at least is what's exciting to me about blockchain in gaming. So if you're a player who's placing at the top of the leaderboards every single season, being able to do something beyond winning some money that you take home, actually influencing that game. Fortnite's a good example with Ninja getting a skin in the game. We're seeing, players having a bigger and bigger say in how these games are developed. And over time, I'm pretty confident that we're going to see careers made solely by playing games, and not just playing in tournaments competitively, but just by farming and, just really bridging the gap between like real world value and what's actually earned in these games.
Thank you. Are there one last question? Let me scroll through. Okay, this one we already took it. Run and gaming. Right now. Yes, I think we've been going almost through all questions here. So there was, congratulations, cool. Maybe one joke for the end. I don't know if it's a pun intended. Like, what about the high gas fees? Like, are you seeing some limitation as well that blockchain are right now at the moment imposing on how DAOs could be used and developed, or not at all?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say right now, on Moloch, we're seeing some really big issues with the gas fees. So voting yes on a proposal costs $1, making a proposal costs $5. A lot of these gamers that we've been working with are really conscious of really, really small amounts of money. So like $1 or less. So when you see these high gas fees, you know, it's honestly a really, really big deterrent that I didn't really think as much about. But even just the fluctuation of one day gas being $1, the next day being like 20 cents is something that I'm really, you know, we definitely need to figure out if we want this to be remotely applicable.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think there's kind of two angles to it. One, you know, is thinking about how few interactions do we need to make the system useful. I mean, it doesn't seem like right now we'd want you know, something on chain to involve tons of interactions. It just doesn't seem like it's the right use of the technology. So like, how few interactions do you need to get the most value or to be the most useful? Like, what's that ratio? And also, yeah, I mean, you know, I think there's an EIP right now to reduce the gas fees substantially. So there's definitely some more basic research going on the Ethereum research side around making the gas fees less expensive. And there's actually, yeah, there's an EIP that's, I think, almost done that's going to make a big difference people are excited about. So ideally that will help as well.
Yeah, I think there's an important aspect there of keeping a lot of DAO stuff off-chain and really only putting stuff on-chain when necessary. So at least in the DAOs that I'm a part of, you know, a lot of the coordination and consensus happens in Discord and Telegram groups, getting a poll saying, hey, would you vote yes on this? And once there is some sort of social consensus, throwing that on-chain. So definitely evolving, but I think that's pretty important to consider as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. More and more discussions are, and getting thoughts on different things. Everything's moving off chain with these high gas fees. We've definitely seen a droppage in voting, though, at least on the DAOStack side of things. So a lot of DAOs are, you know, proposals getting submitted and nothing's happening to them because nobody wants to pay, you know, at least at some point it was $3-4 for a vote, which just doesn't seem worth it.
Yeah, it does seem like from a contract design perspective, it's, you know, where do you locate the costs? And it seems like a higher cost to create the vote if you can get a lower cost to actually submit the vote. Seems like appropriate. It's like, yeah, it seems like you really have to make the actual vote as cheap as possible. And so whatever you can load onto the person making the vote or elsewhere seems like the right thing to do, given just the current gas fees.
All right, so that will be concluding today's event. Before we end, I will give 1 last minute to Alex for his closing talk. I wanted to thank you, everyone. We wanted on behalf of the BGA to thank you, everyone, for taking the time today to come to speak online, presenting what you're doing in terms of DAO, answering all our questions and explaining all the possibilities, the amazing possibilities that are offered by them. I really think it's quite exciting, and I learned a lot today. Thank you. And I hope our audience who watched live, but also will be watching in later the replay on YouTube, will also enjoy all the great learnings here and might connect with you in the future. All right.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for participating and also everyone who's watching. I've been researching this for a little while, and it's actually amazingly difficult to find all the information in one place, and that's why we thought we'd actually get 4 of the major DAO platforms as well as some different opinions into one video, into one stream. So this will now be there for people to come and discover and be able to find some of this information in one go. I'm also going to publish some of my own notes in the next week or two, which we'll link to, which just cover my research. And I've just tried to do a quite unbiased bit of coverage on each of the DAO platforms that we've discussed today, and what they can be used for in their current status. And they are all different, and that's the main thing I noticed. They're not all doing the same thing. They're not all just about voting. And the second thing I'll publish is the kind of questions to ask yourself if you're considering a DAO. So you can then try Aragon out, or you can try DAOStack out, or whichever, but having asked yourself the difficult questions. And finally, before I do a final round of thank yous, one thing we didn't do today, which I really didn't want to do, and I'm glad we didn't, was sit around defining what a DAO is, because as came up, in the future, we won't be talking about DAOs. In fact, a DAO is probably quite a strict thing that probably none of these things are, except for Tezos, actually, that have been mentioned. What's really important is people looking to find new forms of collaboration and governance and coordination, and we're just using DAO as a catch-all. It's not necessarily about voting or anything like that. So really what we're doing here is just starting to explore new. Fun enough, it goes back to the comment about CyberSyn, the experiment in Chile. It's actually about trying to find new ways of using technology to coordinate people and get more efficient and more rewarding. So finally, thank you very, very much to everyone. If you have any questions for any of the speakers, I'm sure they'll be prepared to answer you and share their details in due course. And you can contact us through the BGA, through our Discord and through our Telegram. And again, I'd like to follow this up in a few months' time as well, to see how projects are going. MetaClan and Metagame in particular, they're pretty interesting. But we'll also see where StakerDAO is going. See if they can take on Whale, which is a new NFT currency. That will be interesting. So that's it. Thank you very much, and we'll just end there, I think.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, guys.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.